Welcome back. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for being on time. We are on item number 7, which is a discussion and consideration of the alternate route for DVM graduates to practice as RVTs. In your packet is language that was kind of background. As you recall, we had a number of meetings and discussed the student exemption in 4830, and we also discussed 2027, which allowed a junior or a senior student to perform animal health care tasks at the level of an RVT in terms of supervision when they were working outside of the practice setting. But there was also language in 2027 that allowed a graduate of a recognized veterinary college to function ostensibly as an RVT for an indefinite period of time. And we realized that having an individual function in the role of a licensee indefinitely without a license and without the fingerprinting and the oversight from the licensing board was not a good thing. So Jennifer Laredo and I formed a task force, and we worked with Anne Marie as well as Ethan Mathis from the Vet Med board, and offers some language that is at the bottom of the second page. Any person who receives a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from a recognized veterinary college listed in section 2022A, or a person who is within 8 months of his or her anticipated graduation from a recognized veterinary college shall be eligible for a period of 1 year to apply for the National Veterinary Technician Examination, and the California Technician Examination is provided for in section 2010. The 8 months language, a person is within 8 months, this is consistent with the language for a veterinary student sitting for the national and state board. So that's where the 8 months comes in and maintains a level of consistency there. We spent quite a bit of time discussing temporary licenses and things of this sort, and also whether or not there was some form of curricula kind of along the lines of the veterinary law exam and things of that sort, which are again appropriate for veterinarians, but there isn't necessarily that some of those same tools for RVTs. So this is what we have to offer you today, is this language to try and fill that gap in 2027.5. Christy.
I know, I'm not silent, I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
I have a concern about the year, because I feel like a year only gives the person one time to fail their license and then think about their life and what they're going to do, and then they have to invest in $600 to take the RVT exam, and what am I going to do with my life when I just failed the exam and I now have to take the RVT license, and what am I going to, I mean, it's just like really, it's a short amount of time when you think about it to figure out what they're going to do, and now they really have to think about, I have to take my license, the RVT license, because I have to do it now, I only have a year. And I totally agree that we need to put a time frame on it, but a year? Am I understanding that correctly?
You are.
Okay.
Yes, Dick.
I guess I'm not understanding it then. My read on it says that if I'm a graduate of a recognized school, I can do RVT tasks up to a year unless I get a license.
Right.
Okay.
You've got a 1 year grace period to get one license or the other, basically. Is that okay? And your concern is that you don't think a 1 year grace period is long enough.
If you say it like that, yes, but if you know, to figure out your life too, I mean, it's both things, I guess, I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around, you know.
Jeff?
As Chrissy said, you have to put a date on it, whether it's a year or 2 years or 5 years. You know, you have to agree on a time, number one. But number two, when in the course of someone's career Are they, let's say, above the average, likely to have a problem or commit an error? It's when they're young and inexperienced and they've just started. And number three, I think, I know so many veterinary assistants that have finished the RVT course and they're, quote, waiting to take the test. It's almost like a third category. And so if you make it a year, you motivate them to take the test.
But we're not saying that after a year they can't take the test anymore. We're saying they can't practice, they can't do the RVT tasks anymore, correct? They can, after the year's up, they can still take both tests.
That is not what this
It
says.
says they only have a year within which they can take the test.
Right.
And then they're done? No, they can't try it again?
Yeah, with this language, they would have a year to practice, and within that year, they'd have to take the test.
And what happens if they exceed the year?
Doesn't
Then
make
they're a
sense.
veterinary assistant for the rest of their life?
Well, they still have the option to take their veterinary
DVM.
boards, right? We've not affected that,
Well, why wouldn't they have the option to take the RVT test?
because at this point, they're not functioning as a veterinarian during that year, they're functioning as RVT.
Correct.
And we felt that the whole issue here with this indefinite allowance for an RVT was that it, where there was a significant lack of
No,
consumer.
I understand that, and I agree, I think I agree with Dr. Sullivan. So after the year, if they failed everything, correct, they can't function as an RVT anymore. But on day 367, they could take the RVT. Why can't they take the RVT test then? Or the vet boards?
In reading this, I did not get that into it, and I would disagree with them not being able to take it anymore. What I think it should say is they have to stop being an RVT
Correct.
until they get the proper license to do whichever avenue. But to restrict them from ever taking an RVT test again, I don't think
Yes.
might even be legal.
So while Dave is commenting, I'll have you two create that language, okay? Yes.
I think I did. I think I've got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was
That's what I
struggling with the same thing because the original problem was we were allowing them to function as an RVT forever without taking an examination.
Right.
But we're comfortable if they take the exam and are a graduate veterinarian and they pass the exam, they can be an RVT if they want,
Right.
okay? But none of the other categories have any limits on the number of times an applicant can take the test. Some people take it 2, 3, 4 times. So you would be creating a special burden on one select group of people by limiting the number of times they take the test. So I think, yes, there should be a limit on how long they can be an RVT without taking the test, performing the tasks, but there should be no limit on the number of times that they take it. We just need to massage the language a little bit.
Dr. Klingborg,
Yes.
I may have a fix.
Oh, well, let's see, I think Anne Marie had language, so
I'm
let's.
sorry.
Well, that's okay. We can try it. Maybe yours is probably better.
We may be thinking along the same lines. Instead of shall be eligible, why don't you just insert must take the exam?
Well, or you can just, so that way they know that you're limiting the practice
Must
for 1
pass.
year. So any person who receives the DVM degree from a recognized veterinary college listed in 2022A, or a person who is within 8 months of his or her anticipated graduation date, may,
Right.
from a recognized veterinary college, shall be able to practice for a period of 1 year as an RVT and shall be eligible to apply for the National Veterinary Technician Exam and the California Veterinary Technician Exam as provided for in Section 2010. So you're limiting the practice to 1 year, but you're saying because they hold a DVM, they're eligible to take the exam. Is that what we're trying to accomplish?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Jennifer.
My turn. I like the amended language because I knew that one of our primary concerns was the fingerprinting and the background check, so
right.
I like this amended language that
right.
Anne Marie just came up with.
Thank you.
Bill, did you have a comment?
You covered it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So I do want to ask for the public comment, and then we can continue to interject, okay? Public, yes, come on down.
Am I allowed to speak?
Not at the moment.
Some people have to walk out of the room, I think, right?
We have a quorum in the room.
Yeah.
Board, so if you're a
Yeah.
board member and you're on this committee, you can only participate as an observer, which means no commenting unless we lose the quorum of the board.
Oh.
So this is like musical chairs.
So this is just saying what you want. We're out.
Just tell me what you want me to do.
That
You'll
was me
come.
and my indoor voice.
Cheryl Waterhouse, Veterinary Medical Board. So a couple questions that I have. So even with the amended language, it says 1 year to apply to take the examination. And so once you apply, then you still have a certain length of time, correct, to take the exam?
Yeah, but if we amend out that 1 year to apply, they can apply at any time. We're saying now with the amended language, it's 1 year, they're eligible to practice for 1 year.
For 1 year.
And are eligible to take the RVT exams.
Okay. And the second part, what are you going to do with the veterinarians who have been practicing at RVTs for years currently?
Respectfully, I think they would get a pass. I don't think we can look backward here, so our preliminary discussions would be that perhaps that's a pretty small group, I think less than 50. So I'm not quite sure we can reach back. I would think that this would be looking forward, because I would think that to look back, I would rather rely on attrition rather than trying to go backwards legally.
So
I would have a question. Is that group graduates of accredited programs, or are those foreign?
I know of one.
Educated.
I personally know of one, so I
I
don't
know of two if they're still working, yes. They're from Filipinos that never passed,
Italian, the one I
never
know.
took the exam,
They
frankly.
have to be from an accredited school.
Everybody, just from a legal perspective, I appreciate the amendments, but I just want to make sure that the board fully, and MDC fully understands what it's doing here, because I'm going to go historical for a second. So when I was with the medical board, the USMLE, or the licensing examination to be a doctor, had 3 parts. Cleverly named Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3. Step 3 was the clinical exam. And what the medical board found was if you took, like some doctors took 15 or 20 tries to pass Step 3. Well, you know what? Generally, the medical board then saw those folks in the enforcement realm. Okay? Because it's obvious there seemed to be a pretty strong correlation between how many times you passed the clinical, how many times you attempted the clinical examination to the enforcement realm. So the medical board at one time had a deal that said you had five tries at it, period. 5 tries, that was it. And so that met with a lot of constitutional concern, because you were shutting off something. So then they amended the statute to say, unless you went out and got some more training, or supplemental training, or supplemental course of instruction. So I just want to be clear that what the board is saying here is, you go to become a DVM, and so you can still continue on trying to pass DVM, but then from 8 months prior to graduation, or 1 year after graduation, you can practice as an RVT. And then after that, you best be successfully completing the examination, because you can't practice. So that's what I didn't see that here. Dr. Sullivan and I had a conversation. That the stop practice language isn't in here, but it's in your amended language. So I just want to make sure conceptually, that's what is under consideration here. Is that correct?
Yes, except I don't understand when we talked about this not being retroactive or prospective, however you want to look at this. In my mind, this takes effect, and
Right.
anyone who's currently practicing as an RVT without a license would only be eligible to practice for 1 year from the time this takes effect, and then they have to stop practicing and take the exam. Because I'm not sure why everybody who's currently under that umbrella would get a pass and we're creating this kind of inequity now for any new graduate who arguably is much more current in terms of their recent curriculum and, you know, evolution of practice and being exposed to the latest and greatest.
Well, like I said, whatever, as we talked about last time, statutes and regulations are generally considered to be prospective, as they look forward. And so, unless there, at least in statute, there's some sort of deliberate intent to make it retroactive, I'm not quite sure we can get there here via regulation, but I think the public policy would suggest that in fact there may be a relatively small number of these folks that are in this particular, because this is, just so we understand each other, this would be somebody who went to DVM school, that's minor, and then did not, for whatever reason, maybe never decided to take the licensing examination or couldn't pass it. I don't want to be pejorative here. And so they're working as a DVM. I think Mr. Johnson pointed out the issue where they've never been printed, they've never been tested, they're nothing. So conceivably that's a consumer protection risk. The legal risk is if we get challenged to look backwards. So much like attrition, where these are probably, I don't know how many people there are, probably the same number, that are doing something else, but I'm a little reluctant to suggest that we can look backwards. Okay.
Dick, Ellen, and then Christie.
First, I want to clarify,
Yeah, that's
2022A, my interpretation of that is an accredited school, not any foreign school, but they have to be accredited. So that whittles the number down. I think we could probably clean this up and address both problems by saying as of a certain date, this would be enacted. But but I still think we need to capture those that are practicing because we still need their fingerprints. So we can say that they're grandfathered in, but they're going to have to be. We can license them as we've done with RVT programs, and get their fingerprints and get them legal. But I think we do have to keep in mind this is accredited U.S. schools, not any foreign school. And I think that would that will have the numbers down considerably.
Ellen, Christie.
This brings up, I had a question and I realize it's probably in 2022A, where it uses the term recognized.
B is recognized, A is accredited.
I think the confusion, I agree with Dr. Sullivan, the confusion here is using these terms, what I see as interchangeable. Accredited, I would hazard to guess from my experience on the ECFVG, is that the number of graduates of accredited university programs, college programs, is probably, you can count them on one hand. The vast majority of them are graduates, be they foreigners, be they Americans, of non-accredited, recognized veterinary schools on the rest of the planet.
A is accredited.
And B is recognized.
So I'm not closing the loop.
I don't think there are that many graduates of accredited programs who are functioning as an RVT without a license.
But even if there's one, we want them fingerprinted and on the books.
Christie.
I was going to speak to what both of them were saying, so we're good.
So we have language in front of us that has been amended. Other discussion on that, and again, the audience is welcome.
Do we want to add in what they're talking about though, to add in a date or to add in?
Well, I don't know that we do. I mean,
Okay.
that is a topic of conversation. I guess I don't know if we put a date in, if we say as of February 1st of this year, how does that change things looking backwards?
I'm not sure that it does.
I don't think it makes a difference.
I'm not sure that it does, and like I said, I'm not trying to be the wet blanket here, but I just want to point out a couple things. A lot of times, a lot of times what happens when you talk about grandfathering and things, it's a license that keeps renewing, okay? This isn't that case. These people are not licensed perhaps now. They're running along unfettered, unabated in their quasi RVT, but not quite within the practice. So the vet med board doesn't really know they exist, so to speak, correct? Okay, so that's one thing. So there is a question of, when we talk about, in all due respect to everybody, we talk about printing and that sort of stuff, you would be printing somebody who wouldn't be your licensee, essentially.
No, I think they're talking about printing someone who falls into this category that they can only practice for a year. They have to then take the exam and be printed and get a license, or they stop practicing. So that's where you're closing the loop on printing these individuals, is they have to get a license after a year, or they stop practicing. So again, I haven't had the same experience with not being able to basically effectuate something for those that have not yet come under this umbrella and those that have in the past. The example I have is CE, where in my past we adopted regulations that says, as of this date, and everybody had to do CE. It didn't
Right.
matter whether you got your license after the effective date of those regulations or had a license before, you were subject to CE.
I don't disagree with that analogy. I don't think we're similarly situated. I don't think we're similarly situated here, though, because I'm not really understanding, because you're going to print somebody. And the reason you generally print somebody is ultimately you're going to make a decision whether they deserve to be licensed or not.
Mhm.
Here, right now, we would print them. Let's say we print them, and we print them on the day that they graduate. They have a year, so.
Mhm.
And they're not really subject to anything that we're doing. We're not gonna cite them for unlicensed practice. We're not gonna deny their license because they don't need one
For a year, yeah.
for a year.
I hear what you're saying.
So that's what I'm saying. I'm a little bit. I'm not, like I said, not trying to be a wet blanket. I'm just trying to figure out the public policy associated with what we're doing here. I totally understand the board's concern was, like I said before, people run along unabated. And there's no demonstration of continuing competency, there's no demonstration of Corey background or anything, and yet close to pharmaceuticals and everything else.
Okay, so I don't see this any different as where you have a healthcare license that has an externship. And during that externship, whether that be 9 months or a year, they are not subject to licensure until and after they complete that year. And then they come before the board and they apply for a license, take the exam, and you make a decision about licensure. During that year, you're absolutely right. The only thing we know is they're under supervision and they're completing some form of an externship. I don't see this any different, other than these people hold a degree. That may be the difference. But they're still, just like you would, I came from a profession where they had a 9-month externship. We didn't license them during that 9 months. They completed the externship and then applied to the board. So essentially they were out there practicing without a license until such time they completed that experience. And then they came to the board and they applied for a license and what have you.
Again, I give advice in all candor. The externship, sometimes you're functioning umbrella of the
This wasn't under the university.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but there's no, it's not even, these folks are theoretically under the supervision of the veterinarian, but again, it's sort of a situation where we're not even aware they exist, and they're doing something that doesn't require a license right now by virtue of their degree.
Mhm.
So I would just ask, I'm not going to stand in the way of I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm going to answer the narrow question. I don't think necessarily that you can look back. Okay, perhaps you can. I can do some research on my initial research that you can't look back. But the question is, are you looking back for 20 people, 25 people, 30 people? And I get there's, as long as you have one, there's some risk. I totally get that. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Jennifer?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the issue of retroactive background checks and fingerprinting for RVTs is an issue that hasn't been resolved in general, not just for this eligibility category. So if and when we resolve that, these candidates would also be included in that.
Well, they would be included at the time they applied for a license. So the retroactive issue that you're referring to are people that were licensed before the year 2000. And so if we go back and retroactively print those people, it would be people that are currently licensed RVTs that would have to then be fingerprinted upon renewal to capture all of those fingerprints that weren't captured at the time of application. These individuals, if this language stands the way it is, would be printed, say, foreseeably after a year. If they decide to take that year in practice before they take the exam, they would have to be printed at the time of application.
Okay.
CVMA, RVT committee, and CARVTA, I'm going to ask you in a minute if you're aware of a whole bunch of people out there that fit into this group. So I'll ask you on the record in a minute. I'm just giving you a chance to prep your answer. Dr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I think this is a consumer protection issue, and I think we need to somehow, whether it's 1 or 10 or 50, we need to somehow identify them and get them in the loop. I think it is consumer protection.
Okay, come on down, CVMA, RVT committee, and CARVTA, and let us know if you're aware if this is an issue.
Nancy Ehrlich with CARVTA. I'm not aware of this being a particular problem with graduates of accredited programs. I think the bigger problem, which is not being addressed right here, is foreign graduate veterinarians wanting to become RVTs, and this does not address that issue at all. But I am a little confused about this language, and maybe in the amendment you've addressed it, but it says that they're either a graduate of veterinary school or 8 months before graduation, they get a year. Now, if you take the year starting at 8 months, it ends at 12 months later, and even though you graduate, you don't get another 12 months when you graduate. That's correct? You only get 1 year. I'm not sure that that's clear in the way the thing is worded.
We can certainly change that to say shall be eligible for a period of 1 year from their anticipated graduation date. So we can simply move that phrase.
Whatever.
8
I
months
think try to make
1
it
year.
clear that, I'm not, that they can start practicing
Right.
8 months prior to graduation.
No, the 8 months is for the eligibility of the exam. So just like DVM students, they're eligible to take their exam 8 months from graduation.
Oh, they can take the
Yeah.
exam, but they can't. but-
Practice, no,
but
because they
they
haven't graduated yet. So this would be people who are eligible to take the exam within 8 months of their graduation date.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So the
I would encourage you then,
pre-qualification-
make sure the language makes that clear, because it wasn't at all clear to
The
me.
pre-qualification, as the first sentence says, is a person who receives a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree. So you have to meet that threshold to practice for a year without a license. But you are eligible to take the exam within 8 months of graduation. So that 8 months is about taking the exam, not about practicing.
And just, I think David may have addressed this already, but the other eligibility categories to become an RVT, particularly a graduate of an AVMA-approved RVT program, that eligibility never expires. The person, you can graduate in 1990, and in 2045, you can still take the RVT exam if you're still alive. So I presume that would still be, there's an unlimited period after graduation that they are eligible to take the RVT exam.
Right, and that's definitely a comment that bears consideration.
Yes, and that would make sense, because obviously someone who graduated from veterinary school would probably prefer to be a veterinarian. And while they're figuring out whether they are going to be able to become a veterinarian, maybe 2 or 3 years later, they decide, well, I can't do that, I'll become an RVT.
Right.
Yes.
I just have a question. I'm trying to, excuse me, put this all together. I understand the difficulty in making something retroactive. That part I get. But can't you make a new regulation to correct something that has been wrong or has not worked correctly as a separate standalone? And what I'm getting at is, couldn't you identify generically this group of people and say any graduate veterinarian under 22 or 2022 A and B who has not successfully become a veterinarian but is performing the RVT job test? That's what the key is. They can be a veterinary assistant forever, but if they're doing the exclusive tasks, if they're performing these tasks, must apply for and successfully pass the RVT exam from this day forth. So you're correcting something that was never intended to be forever, and you're doing it under the consumer protection that you're bringing them into the system. You're not putting a limit on it, but you're telling them what they have to do to continue to perform those tasks. Now, if none of those people, if they're one of that group of people and they're not performing any of the exclusive tasks, they're not really the board's concern, they're the veterinarian's concern. That would be an alternative.
That would be an alternative. So let me give you sort of an analogy. So the psych board, Board of Psychology has right below the full-on psychologists, they have like a little bit lesser category. And what happened is somewhat analogous to here. Would go there, and then that lesser category would be a terminus, right? They just stop there and they'd be this forever. And the psychology board, but that lesser category is still a category of licensure that has to be renewed. And so what they have done is they have said, we will renew this thing 6 times. That's it. And then you're on to being a psychologist, or you're on to, 1-800 whatever, truck master or whatever, right? So, but again, please understand that's a category of licensure. And so, even though I think it's called a registered psychological assistant or something like that, that's something that their board has deemed, you get the grant of authority from us. Here, we really haven't granted that. We sort of allowed a kind of a backdoor. I think if you're sort of like, okay, well, the degree kind of stands for the proposition, colloquially, you kind of know what you're doing, right? And so I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that if you want to go the route of, you could say any person who doesn't have this, did this, is now functioning, we could certainly try that. Shall within 1 year of the passage's regulations successfully complete an exam. You can give that a whirl too. There is some risk there because obviously you're messing with somebody's livelihood, but again, that's worth a try too.
Leah, are you aware of any issue with a lot of DVM graduates that are functioning in the capacity of RVTs that do not have a license?
No, none have been brought to the attention of our committee, and Val did also just confirm that our CVMA database does not have any way to pull that information out from it. So,
okay, great. So Nancy brings up a valid point, and with the amendment that we had considered where we were sandwiching in able to practice as an RVT for 1 year, that doesn't work because there is some confusion here, and we've got 2 different things going on. We've got sitting for the test as one goal, and then we have practicing as an RVT as the other goal. So 2027.5, I would offer that the language that you see in front of you now becomes 2027.5A. And that B says, any person who receives, it's the very first part of this paragraph up to the comma of A. Any person who receives a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from a recognized veterinary college listed in 2022A shall be able to practice as an RVT for 1 year, period.
Or, I had a similar fix. So the same first sentence may perform the RVT job task for a period of 1 year from the date of graduation.
Okay, which is
That work?
better. Yeah.
Okay.
So we still don't have the retroactive issue resolved. And I'm personally okay with that. I think that I would like to at least vote on this or move it in one way or the other. And if we decide that the retroactive issue is too important to let go, then vote no on this motion. That would be the suggestion. But I do need a motion in a second if we're going to move forward. Yes.
We could also add Part C to address this and have staff, knowing our intent, having staff write it up so it's legally correct. And I move for that.
With part C,
Yes.
basically.
A, B, and C.
Okay,
Second.
motion and a second, A, B, and C, committee discussion.
So that's to rewrite it, A, B, and C, correct? So not voting on language today.
No, we're voting on language today. A is as you see. B is, will you read B again?
Oh.
How about reading the whole thing?
Okay, A. Any person who receives a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from a recognized college listed in section 2022A, or a person who is within 8 months of his or her anticipated graduation date from a recognized college shall be eligible to apply for the National Veterinary Technician Examination and the California Veterinary Technician Examination as provided for in section 2010. B. Any person who receives a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from a recognized veterinary college listed in section 2022A, or a person who is within, or actually, we don't need who is within 8 months of their graduation. It should end at listed in section 2022A, shall be eligible to perform, or may perform the RVT job task for a period of 1 year from the date of graduation. C would be figuring out some form of a retroactive approach to capture those individuals who have been doing this prior to the adoption of this regulation.
Right, I don't know if I could be so bold, that's probably along the lines of any person who is currently performing the function of RVT but has not, then shall cease practice until he or she successfully completes the examination. That's sort of what I think, and again, there, I will have to look in constitutionally if that, where we kind of are on that, but that was kind of what I'm thinking conceptually.
Yes, Dave.
And I would want, again, consistent with section 2022A also.
In item C.
Yes.
Question.
Yes.
So then on B, it doesn't say whether they have a license or not. You're just saying that they are able to practice or perform the duties of an RVT. So if it's without a license, I think you need to be clear that it's without a license.
Well, any person who's received a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from a recognized veterinary college, the license that they would have would be the DVM license.
That's not a license,
That's
that's
not
a
a
diploma.
license.
Degree, okay. Is that a subtlety, or is that?
Well, that's real, I think that's a real thing, and I think if you're saying that person is able to practice, in A, you're talking about taking the exam, now you kick down to B, and it says you can perform the duties, but it doesn't say you need a license or you don't need a license. So that's very vague.
So would it help if you said a DVM graduate from a recognized veterinary college listed in may perform the RVT task for a period of 1 year from the date of graduation without holding the RVT license?
Correct.
Okay. Yes.
Are we finished discussing A and B and C?
Well, we do have, I think, a motion in a second.
Okay, well, I'll try to find, so then, if I may hearken back to discussions over the last 2 years, 3 years perhaps. So it says here, a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree. What about those people who have bachelors of veterinary science, or who have a degree that's called a Tierarzt?
How about a graduate of a recognized veterinary,
Is that
Yes, but all recognized veterinary medical colleges do not confer doctorate of veterinary medicine degrees.
Get rid of that.
Australia
Germany.
and Germany.
Just say a graduate.
Are they accredited as
Are they
in?
No, this is, I'm getting back again to the difference. We're confusing ourselves. And certainly the public, I believe, is very confused with the difference between a recognized college and an accredited one.
Right, and they intentionally limited this, or today, this language is limited to to accredited, not recognized.
This says
A
any
is
person.
accredited.
No, it says recognized.
does say recognized. It doesn't
So
say
because of the language in 2022, so maybe we need to read that.
That needs to be
Change it
changed
accredited
in
instead of
2022.
recognized, cause he's saying.
Okay, but I hear what you're saying and I understand what he's saying. But if you look at the language in 2022, it uses the language recognized as accredited. So it says, in accordance with the provisions of section 4846 of the Business and Professions Code, the board recognizes veterinary colleges accredited by the American Veterinary Medical Association. B is, all other veterinary colleges must have the academic standards equivalent to schools accredited, so this is an equivalency, equivalent to schools accredited by the AVMA in order to be recognized by the board. So I think the confusion here is it's board recognition of accreditation. So A is board recognition of accreditation, B is board recognition of equivalency or equivalent accredited college. So
There's no such thing.
as what? They're not
You're
accredited.
either accredited or you're not.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. B is we recognize colleges that are not accredited but are equivalent to schools that are accredited.
No, that category does not exist. The AVMA has accredited colleges, and then they've got everybody else. It could be a garage in the middle of nowhere, as long as the jurisdiction of origin recognizes that school as a valid higher education institution.
So if we remove, the fact that recognized and accredited are in the same sentence in 2022A is confusing. If we remove recognized from this language and say from an accredited veterinary college listed in 2022A, does that solve your problem? If we use.
Well, I don't know, we need to discuss what the real meaning of 2020, you're talking about accredited schools or recognized schools?
Mr.
I'm talking
Chairman,
about accredited schools.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would defer to Dr. Sullivan, except to say, perhaps it would be at this point, since we have a confluence and plethora of ideas, perhaps would it not be better to try and condense and distill what we're talking about here and then bring this back to the next MDC meeting, because we've got a lot of countervailing forces here, I think. And respectfully, one of the things that we did agendize was the alternative pathway, and now we're talking a little bit about an order to stopping practice, and I'm just a little concerned that we're kind of easing off a little bit. You understand what I'm saying? Because one who reads the agenda may not have been able to readily contemplate and also for DVMs to practice graduates, may not have been reasonably conclude that in fact there'd be a 1-year limitation and stuff like that. So I'm just respectfully suggesting that, is this something that needs a bit more polishing before the MDC wants to vote on it and recommend whatever they're gonna recommend to the board?
Dick.
My only comment was, I think 2022A is very clear, and it's AVMA accredited schools, period.
With respect to legal counsel, I think that what we've been trying to do is collect all those ideas, and it's much easier to do it in this group now than in the subcommittee. Even though all of the good ideas from my subcommittee came from Jennifer, and thank you for that. But we do have language here, Alan. I need to make sure I understand your concern. I need to make sure you're comfortable with the change of the word recognized to accredited in A. Would that give you greater comfort?
That would give me comfort, and changing receives Doctor of Veterinary Medicine to just a veterinary medical degree.
Okay.
Or how about a graduate of?
Okay.
And I'm good.
So
what is your change on?
Any person who receives a veterinary medical degree from an accredited veterinary college listed in section 2022A, and then all the other stuff.
discussion committee? Discussion public? Yes?
Cindy Savely, RVT. I don't know if it's a comment or question. When we're talking about RVT license, it's RVT registration, not license.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's vote.
Can you read this just to make sure that we're all on the same page, please?
Item 1, 2027.5A, any person who receives a veterinary medical degree from an accredited veterinary college listed in section 2022A, or a person who is within 8 months of graduation or of his or her anticipated graduation from an accredited veterinary college shall be eligible to apply for the National Veterinary Technician Examination and the California Veterinary Technician Examination as provided for in section 2010. Are we all good there?
That's A.
That's it. Okay, B. I'm going to say a graduate from a recognized veterinary college listed in section 2022A may perform the RVT job task for a period of 1 year from the date of graduation without holding a registered veterinary technician license. And license and registration are synonymous here, so it's okay. C. Any graduate who is currently performing the RVT job tasks shall cease practice after 1 year until or unless the individual passes the registered veterinary technician examinations as prescribed in subsection B, or subsection A.
Okay? All right, let's vote.
Dr. Klingborg.
Aye.
Dr. Drusis.
Aye.
Dr. Grant.
Aye.
Dr. Pollard.
Aye.
Dave Johnson.
Aye.
Christy Pulowski.
Aye.
Diana Woodward-Hagel.
Aye.
Jennifer Laredo.
Aye.
Dr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Motion carries. Good job, team. We'll let legal straighten out what we messed up later. Let us move to item number 9, review and consider proposed regulations regarding the, do we need a 10-minute break before we tackle this? Are we good? 10-minute break. We've got one element of housekeeping here before we move to item 9.
So for the record, Kurt is right. And Kurt knew he was right. So the issue that we were trying to resolve here while the mics were still on, but we were technically on a break, or the webcast was still on, but the issue we were trying to resolve was having an exemption and then removing that exemption without any kind of statutory authority. So without having this, authority to say you were once exempt from licensure, now you're not, and creating this by regulation could pose a problem. So we are going to attempt to do this and see how it flies. However, there was a problem to begin with, as many of you who've been involved in this discussion know. 2027 referred to juniors, seniors, and graduates. Juniors and seniors were under the auspices of the university and therefore were not necessarily practicing veterinary medicine without a license. They were still students. But then we had this unusual category of graduates who essentially were exempt from licensure without there being any specific authority in the law. And now what we're trying to do is fix that exemption without a statute. So we are going to have to look at the probability of doing that, but it makes perfect sense. Thank you, Mr. Hepler.
If you could just send home a note to my wife.
You were right.
Item 9, veterinary compounding. As you know, we've been working through some language for a little while here when we learned we didn't have the statutory authority to compound, something that we know is all critical to our daily practice. And so Dr. Sullivan and I have been working as a subcommittee and have kind of done this dueling banjos thing with language as we try and find the right answer here. What you'll find is that his language is in here and mine isn't, so you can tell who's done a better job on that. But I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Sullivan and also point out that we do have some representatives from UC Davis here, including their pharmacists, and so let's get as much input as we can from the audience as well as the committee as we try and work through this. Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you. It is joint work because whenever I would put something out there, John would have some good concrete criticism of it and vice versa. So I think it is a joint project, but still a work in process, a working document, let's say. It needs a lot of work. The first part is the statute that's already passed in law. And then kind of the approach I took is I looked at the Board of Pharmacy's new regulations that just passed. And I just took a look at them and said, how do they work within our practice and what do we need to define in order to address our specific situations? I want to make it very clear that we are not expanding our scope of practice. What we are trying to do is to clarify what we have been doing. And the unique situation has to come with efficacy and safety of our patients, as particularly when they may have adverse reactions to some medications, or when we may need to make certain combinations in order to effectively treat their size or the species. So I'm not sure how you want to start this, John. If you want to go ahead and just go through each item, or do you want to talk about it philosophically first, which I have no comment on.
This language is over on the table, by the way. It came in at lunchtime as well, in addition to the Board of Pharmacy's language also, for those of you who in the audience that want to read along. Well, I think the big difference between our two drafts is that really what Dr. Sullivan has done is distilled down the bare essentials of what we need in order to continue to practice successfully and safely. And I would venture to say that that's as much philosophy as I think we need to have on that. So now it gets into nuts and bolts of compounding. And Dr. Wiebe, I'm wondering if you can actually come forward at this point and introduce yourself, and we can start to get your expertise as we kind of meander through this language.
Hi, I'm Dr. Valerie Wiebe, and I'm from UC Davis. I'm the director of pharmacy there, so I deal with, we're actually licensed by the Board of Pharmacy, so I have a little bit of input maybe coming from their direction.
Great. Within the document itself, there were a couple of specific areas that you had noted that we could revise or refine just very quickly. And so I wanted to incorporate those pieces and then kind of walk through this in order. But let's get those two additions or corrections that you had offered to me.
So under 2033.1, which is talking about compounding limitations and regulations, A says no drug should be compounded prior to its need by a patient. In general, I think that's fine for specific medications. However, I think a lot of veterinarians as well as human pharmacists have to have something prepared in advance. Not in any manufacturing capacity, but there is an exemption. I don't have the book in front of me, but for pharmacists, they can look back and look at the historic need, and if they can justify using or going through that product over time, a very short period of time, they can make it in preparation for, say, 5 patients that might be coming in that day. And it's an estimated amount.
Okay.
There is exact wording in the Board of Pharmacy law book. I just didn't bring it with me. I thought I was just here to listen today.
Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed right up front, which I think you folks have maybe already discussed, is on 2033.6, sterile compounding in veterinary premises. Item number 5, so it says beyond use date of 30 days unless an ingredient has a shorter beyond use date. So there you're kind of blending two different things. When you're talking about bulk chemical analysis or things that you're adding together, you always use the lesser date, no matter what the expiration date of the product would be. As of recently, the Board of Pharmacy has gone in and added verbiage discussing the fact that aqueous suspensions, quote, there's a 14-day supply, a 14-day beyond use date. But again, there's exemptions to that. So in other words, if you have a stability study of something and you've got scientific data to support the beyond use date that you're using, that is okay. So I don't want everybody to think that they can only make something aqueous and it's going to have a 2-week expiration date. A lot of clients can't afford to come back that frequently. It's not economically feasible. It's not practical. So I think, and considering that we've got numbers, we have numerous aqueous compounded products, and I've got stability data on almost all of them, it's not that hard to find.
Great. So key pieces of information.
Definitely.
Great. Do you have anything, as you've had a chance to just peruse this language very briefly, do you have any guidance to give us? Again, we're going to kind of go through this section by section. I don't know if you want to interject section by section or if thematically you have something you want to share.
Just overall, because I do have to follow these laws and tighter restrictions than this, I'm well aware of how this is going to really impact the corner veterinary office. It's a lot of time commitment, it's a lot of organization. How are you going to inspect that? Are you going to find them if they don't document every compounded product that they make? You have to have a log number for each and every product that you make. It has to be printed on the prescription label of each animal that goes home with it. So it requires a lot of work. And I'm, more than happy to give any kind of templates that I've developed, which I think are helpful. I borrowed some of mine from Kaiser. So, but there's ways to do it, but I think that you have to be fairly loose with the veterinarians because they just won't be able to follow the laws. They don't have the time or the staff. That's my big concern.
Totally agree. I was hoping we could maybe look at this a little differently in that I think we have laws and regulations for pharmacists, for compounding pharmacies, there's another category, outsourcing facilities. And I'm hoping that we create veterinary premise compounding, which is much more narrow, but will address what we need.
I think that would be ideal. And I think you guys could come up with something that would be reasonable that people could actually perform or function with.
So as you look at what we have in front of us, we have a category of 20.33, but on the far right, you'll see pharmacy 1735.2, which would be the same category in the pharmacy board, which you have, and it's back on a few pages back. It's page 1 of 41 is where it starts. The clean copy of their regulations, which I believe have been enacted at this point. So 2033 is just taking their verbiage and putting it in as definitions. I would suggest that we may change one word here under A. Compounding means any of the following activities occurring in a licensed veterinary premises by a veterinarian that has established the VCPR for the patient or patients, or an RVT under, I think it should be, say, written orders of a veterinarian rather than indirect. Because what I'm proposing in here, if we are compounding products, we should have a log or a manual specifically saying what that compound product is. I think we need some documentation of this. Otherwise, I don't have any other changes to 2033. It's pretty well taken right out of 1735.2.
Okay, Ellen?
I have a question then. So are we talking about dispensing drugs, or are we talking about in-house use, or both?
Both.
Okay,
If it's compounded, if we're compounding by definition, then we're gonna have to document it.
so in a shelter setting, we don't necessarily, or for the vast majority of our patients, we don't have a VCPR.
I think that's addressed in the definition of the VCPR. The VCPR, if you don't, if it's not a known owner.
Yeah.
So the in-house use necessity piece, I think there's room for that. The problem we're gonna get is if you're selling compounded products, so you are sending it home with your patient, therefore selling this compounded product, right?
Yes, but in a in-house situation, you still have to have a VCPR,
Right,
except for the shelter, right?
right.
I think that's what he's raising that on.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily raising that issue, I just, the in-house use, I think there's room for here, because you're saying you have to do this in order to provide safe and efficacious services to the animal patient. If we start talking about dispensing it, where you're selling a compounded product that was compounded by a veterinarian, I think that's where you may get into problems, is trying to sell a compounded product for the purposes of, and unless you can justify that you can't get this compounded product from a compounding pharmacy or any other source.
And timely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to do that all the time.
Okay, so it's not unusual to dispense a compounded product that you compound in-house that you couldn't otherwise get from a compounding pharmacy.
As far as I'm aware, I think it's entirely legal to sell what
It
you've
is.
compounded as a veterinarian to your clients.
It is
The
illegal.
problem comes in is if you have outsourced compounded products from a pharmacy, they send it to the veterinarian and then the veterinarian resells that.
Well, the last we looked into this with the feds and talked to the federal government about the difference between having a compounding pharmacy and an outsourcing facility, there were no animal compounding outsourcing facilities. And I don't think there are today, are there?
Well, when I say outsourcing, I'm not implying the license,
facility,
right. You're
Okay.
just outsourcing it to another facility
To another
that's
facility.
under the Board of Pharmacy.
So you're outsourcing it, meaning that you're sending it off to a compounding pharmacy who's licensed under the Board of Pharmacy.
Correct,
That sends it to the veterinarian resells it.
correct,
But it's already formulated and compounded at that point.
correct.
So I agree with you, and I think that's where we're having an issue, is that if you're compounding it in-house with the intent to prescribe or sell that, you're gonna have an issue.
I don't think so. I can't think of any law that I've read, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know how you have the
Because-
purview to sell a compounded product if you're not a compounding pharmacy.
Many doctors that don't have compounding facilities will have to actually, in their own office, will still compound some minor things. And they sell it to the patient as well, especially cosmetic things.
Okay,
So I don't think that there's a law that regulates if you've made it, you can sell it. And I think that's either use inpatient or resell to the outside. I think, again, probably where you're going back to is if it's been formulated on the outside, sold to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian cannot resell that, with the exception it used to be 3 days. Now the law has changed it, and I can't even tell you because it's so hazy with regard to whether it's 120 days or there's no law.
I think the limit, and I'll get to you, Dave, I think the limit on compounding and selling comes down to whether or not that veterinarian has done the stability data. And so that's where I'm less likely to compound doxycycline and do that work versus having purchased it from one of the compounding pharmacies and rely on their stability data. And so that would be a check and balance there. The preference being then that we would have as much data as possible when we send medication out the door. But Dave, and then Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to bring up the point that we've discussed, or at least brought to the attention before. So under 2033.1A, if you don't make some provisions for in-house compounding and in-house use, you will impact the shelter community. In our own minutes today from the previous meeting, they mentioned premix. Premix is routinely used throughout the United States as a mixture of xylazine and ketamine made in advance to sedate animals prior to euthanasia. It's not mixed up on a per patient basis. It's mixed up by bottle for the number of animals you can get out of a bottle. And in some instances, it's 5 animals, and others it could be 30 animals. And it would not be uncommon to use 5 or 6 bottles per day. Another example would be the equine product Marquis or Panazarol, which is diluted for routine warming in a shelter environment over a period of time. And I'm sure Dr. Drucy will identify those facilities that have high volume spay-neuter, where they're solely an injectable type of an anesthetic regime, where they're mixing up a day's surgical use at a time for multiple patients. So none of this is being dispensed to the public. It's all being done in-house, but you would have a significant impact depending upon how this is interpreted and applied to that segment of the veterinary community.
I think we're going to address that a little later. Right, we're talking about injectable products, correct?
2 injectable, 1 oral.
Okay.
Bill.
We also, especially commonplace in board of dermatologists, there's not a day that goes by that they're not compounding antibiotics and things based on culture and sensitivity. And Sonotic and God knows what antibiotic is going out, a very, very commonplace. That's done routinely.
So, Alan, your concern here is that because the way that the VCPR is written, and you have not established a VCPR, and yet 2033A requires that a VCR has been established, that you therefore cannot compound. Is that the issue?
Like so many things we've dealt with today, there apparently are conflicting contradictions in what, by statute or by reg, provides guidance to us. Yes, the VCPR does have that exemption for wild animals where the owner and animals where the owner is unknown. There's a subpopulation in every shelter where we do know who the owners are. Yet, we have to be able to treat these animals oftentimes with compounded products. Whether the owner ever shows up or not, we still have owner information. And then what do we consider owner information? The county of Riverside, it's different than the county of Orange. Sometimes it's as simple as a dog wearing a collar with a tag on it with a phone number that maybe doesn't go anywhere. So I don't want to split hairs. I'm just suggesting that when you get down in the weeds, these things are not as simple as they may seem.
Okay, so what I think we need to do there then is come up, maybe Alan, you come up with some language where, again, we're keeping the scope of practice narrow, saying for this patient or this herd, this is what we're doing. We don't want to give the impression that we're a compounding pharmacy making large volumes of this product to use on our animals. We want that scope to be narrow. So if you want to take out VCPR.
No, I think we should leave VCPR in and maybe put in except where applicable in the shelter environment.
We'll need to find some sort of shelter exemption language.
Yeah, that makes me nervous.
Yeah, well, we'll need to talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's keep moving forward. We've captured that.
Okay. I don't think we've captured Anne Marie's concern, though, about us making especially dermatological products that are recommended by, you know, our specialists saying, combine these two sterile products and treat that ear today, not 3 or 4 days from now. But and I don't know how to address that.
Thoughts?
Again, it's something we've been doing safely and efficaciously for 30 years. So
I think going back to a comment that I pointed out when we were going back and forth with these different versions, and we were talking about two very different exceptions, if you will. The immediate use exception and the simple compounding exception. And simple compounding is something that's covered in USP, but not in pharmacy code. Yet the immediate use injectables are covered in pharmacy code. And maybe you can speak to this better than anyone here at the table. Does the pharmacy board recognize simple compounding as something different than requiring all of the equipment and the protocols for traditional compounding that may not be mixing two ingredients for a very specific use?
The Board of Pharmacy is very strict with sterile products. So anything that you mix, even in a syringe with two products, is considered sterile compounding, and it's illegal to do without a sterile compounding license. Especially any controlled substances, Kitty Magic, any of those prefab things that the shelters like to use and make the morning of before all the spays and neuters. They view that as absolutely compounding, and that's not immediate use. They're talking within 6 hours of use. But when it gets down to oral, topical, and especially ear preps for dermatology, et cetera, they want everything, the paperwork has to be there, documenting the lot in case one of those vehicles or bulk products were actually on recall. So that's the reason why they're tracing it back. And it's basically all about animal safety. They're just really trying to get a grip on veterinarians now, I think, too. And they're starting to, I start seeing that word veterinarian pop up in a lot of the pharmacy regulations lately. I'm like going, oh dear, because they are extremely strict with any sterile products. As far as topicals, I would be less concerned, but they do have to follow through with the paperwork that's in here.
So the record keeping, but not necessarily the preparation protocols.
Correct. And they honestly really don't care if that product is used in-house or sold to the outside. They just want to make sure it's safe and it's done safely. And it's done according to the recipe files.
Can I just clarify something? You said immediate use is within 6 hours?
There's all kinds of, depending on what's in the product, they have different dating. So if you're just pulling something up out of a syringe, then that's considered repackaging.
Right.
And that's actually sterile compounding in the eyes of pharmacy, which I hope you guys don't go there. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I know, it's a nightmare. I heard you say the 6 hours and I didn't know. So I didn't know if that was part of the immediate use.
Yeah, that's actually probably the furthest out. Most of them are within an hour.
That's what we have heard
Yeah.
before, so
Yeah.
that's why I was confused with the 6 hours.
Yeah.
Bill?
What about something like oral metronidazole, liquid metronidazole, compound?
Okay, so to be used by a veterinarian in-house?
Both in-house and prescription now, because they send that in, fairly
Big containers.
The question was about liquid metronidazole, oral metronidazole, both in-house and scripted out through. In fact, the product that we get, you talk about reselling this. That's a great example of a liquid that we are going to use in-house, but it's also going to be scripted out and or resold to a patient. And again, that's a daily event.
Correct, we do that as well. So again, that falls under the aqueous category, which as long as you have a stability study to basically document that it's going to last for more than 2 weeks, which there are on PubMed, you can download those. Bottom line is you can make it in anticipation of how much you're going to use by historical knowledge. So I don't think any human pharmacy doesn't go after you for that. That's fine. The problem again would be if you're purchasing it from a pharmacy to store as a veterinarian and to be resold, that's a problem. And again, they keep changing the law on that. It used to be maximum of 72 hours, and then they upped it to 120. But now, from feedback that I'm getting, and I haven't seen the last piece of legislative reading, but apparently there, and maybe you guys know this better than I, that there's no longer, quote, a date limit on that at all, or a time limit. So that's just for veterinarians. Yeah. So, which basically now means it opens the door for you to resell compounded products for any time you want.
The explanation that we received on the 120-hour was that that was specifically directed to the pharmacist compounding the product.
Correct.
So it wasn't restricting us sending the medication. If we had a quantity and it was based upon a guesstimate of how much was going to be used, if you used it all up on one patient, then you didn't have anything for your other patients. So the restriction was to the pharmacist.
Correct. And I think the whole concept there was the compounding pharmacists want to get the money. So what they do is if the veterinarian is restricted to only 3 days worth, then that gives them time to compound for that specific animal and mail it to them. That was the intent of the 3 days. But then that got expanded to 120 days because compounders weren't actually able to get that to them in 72 hours. But again, from my understanding, recent laws, there is no time limit.
Okay. Anything further on 2033? We do need, I think, quite a bit of work on this yet, so we'll go on though. 2033.1, which would be comparable to 1735.5 in the pharmacy regs.
And Dick, I agree. I think we do have a lot of work still to do, and there's so many different groups that are involved that have oversight. So I think the hope here as we run through this is to try and capture goals and pluses and minuses, but we really need to keep our eye on what are our true objectives as we look at what we must have. We obviously don't want veterinarians to just open up a compounding pharmacy.
Right.
There needs to be some legitimacy to the products that they're making and selling to a known population, et cetera. So again, we're not going to be voting on this today, but we need to be capturing a little bit of detail here about where we think we're missing the boat or where we've got something that we really like.
So 2033.1A, I kind of limited it on what we can do in-house because we aren't pharmacists, and I think that we need to identify the product we're compounding for a specific case. I think we can justify that. B, I think that if we are compounding to try to come into compliance with the pharmacy laws, I think we need to have master formulas, both to comply, but also for the safety of our patients. That's part of the oversight that I think we need to provide others in the practice and the RVTs. And that should include, and I got a list of them, it's not all inclusive, but I put down what I thought we could do reasonably. I don't think some of the things that a compounding pharmacy does, I don't think it's within our ability to do. So I think these are the things that we can do and should be doing. C, I put in there, actually we kind of do this right now. If we're compounding, let's say, I'll oftentimes use the example of Rimadyl, and it's a 3-pound dog, and you're diluting down that crushed pill. I just put the formulation right in the chart, and that way when it keeps getting refilled, it's right there and people can go to it. So, and I took that out of their regulations. If it's a unique formulation, you can just put it in the chart. D is just, again, responsibility of who has the oversight. Any comments on that? And this is for, this is non-sterile compounding we're talking about. Record keeping, I think that, again, we need it in the patient file, and we need it, the formulations written in a master file. We have to document, we have to have a paper trail of who's doing it, who has the oversight, who's prescribing it, and a beyond use date. Labeling can get real tricky. So there we kind of referred back to what our existing labeling requirements are. Again, we're doing this for an individual patient or herd or group, and I think that what we need to state on there is what the product is, how it should be dispensed and used, and I think we can do that part fairly easily. If you look at the pharmacy requirements, it's very extensive, and I'm not sure we can comply with that.
Dick, do you think that that's gonna fly?
Well, again, I think what we have to convince people of is that we're a separate compounding category. We're out here with a special niche that we've got to fill, otherwise we're going to have patients at risk. And I think when we get to the injectable, I think we can give some really good examples of the need. Okay. Just keep going.
Yeah, please. Yep.
2033-4 is policies and procedures. What I did here is I looked at 795. I was reading through that, and I was kind of struck by, and I think we do have that, don't we?
Yeah.
Is it in the packet or separate? Well, anyway, in there it describes to great detail what we can and can't do, what compounding pharmacies can and can't do. But what I found was there's a great explanation of categories of compounding. Simple, moderate, and I don't know what the third is. Complex. And I think if we restrict our use to simple, that we'll have a lot more credibility, and I think that's all we really should be doing. And their prime example right in 795 is sodium bromide or potassium bromide, I'm not sure which, and then they've got alongside it veterinarian. So it's a good example of what we do and what we need, and it's simple, and the equipment is simple, everything is straightforward with it. So I think that's how we should limit our scope, unless there's examples of where we need more complicated procedures. But from a general practitioner, I cannot think of any others. Great. So again, I'm just reiterating the need for a manual. If you go down to the end of B, that is wrong there. It should be, instead of 1735.2C, it should be 2033.1C. 2033.1C, which refers back to our regulations. 2033.5 is facilities and equipment. We just need to make sure that it's maintained and that it's clean because we're doing simple procedures. I also put in there no hazardous drugs compounded. Without the proper equipment, protective gear, and training. Further down, I also have no hazardous drugs. Well, we'll get to that. So anyway, this says that if you're I think it says, even though I wrote it, if it's hazardous drug compounding, then you better have the proper equipment, protective gear, and trained personnel, which is simply saying you better be following the pharmacy code.
You might want to reference USP 800 now, because that would be the
I'm sorry, USP,
800, which is fairly new.
Okay.
Yeah, started this January.
Okay, good. 2033.5 is comparable to 1735.7, and basically we're saying that if you have RVTs on staff that are compounding, you have to document their training and their training to do it, and making sure that they're understanding the entire process. In other words, documentation. Uh, 2033.6 gets to the complicated part. Sterile compounding in veterinary premises, and that's comparable to that huge section 1751. So what I've tried to do here is to say we've got to follow 1751, except on situations where, for efficacy and safety, we need to do something different. And my cocktail reference, there's a bunch out there, but mine is ACE, promazine, ketamine, and Valium. And if we don't use that ACE promazine, these animals wake up really rough. I mean, they're banging their heads on the wall or in the floor, and it just isn't pretty. And the amount of ACE that we need is so small that I'm not sure there's a syringe that can calculate that dose. I think I figured for a 7-8 pound cat, it comes out to 0.035 cc's. And it's just a lot easier to put 1 cc of ACE promazine and ketamine and draw that dosage out, and you get a very safe and effective product. So that's kind of the approach to this section, where it says, the dilution of the ingredients is essential for the safe administration of the preparation. There are no human or animal drugs that satisfy the need of this preparation. And I think John inquired at a couple of compounding pharmacies to see if they would even compound ACE promazine and ketamine, and they said no way. So we're left.
It's up to us to make it. Nobody else wants to make it for us.
3, there is a historical documentation of the need, safety, and efficacy of this preparation. And I think in some of the material we got today on anesthesia and sedation, there's a lot of literature out there referencing these types of cocktails. And I also added only FDA sterile products can be used in the ingredients, because we need to document that it's clean. I mean, if I have ketamine on the shelf and I can use it till its expiration date, and I'm going in and out of that bottle X number of times, I should be able, if I take that product and another similar FDA-approved product, I'm hoping we can convince them that we can put it together safely and store it safely. And I put on here with a beyond use date of 30 days. And I think that hopefully gives us enough time to use the product economically and safely. So that's combining those number 4 and number 5. I don't know if it'll fly, but I think we've got good documentation. My other example was I have a 100 milliliter bottle of ACE promazine. And if I could draw out 0.035, if I could, cc's, I'm going into that bottle over 3,000 times. So I think it's a lot more efficacy to put 1 cc in the ketamine, use that bottle before I keep going back into the ACE promazine. So those are my examples. And then the lice item number 6 is no hazardous drugs may be used. I only talked to one oncologist, and maybe we need to research this one a little bit more, but she could not think of any time that they would take a hazardous chemotherapy drug and need to dilute it or change it in any fashion. She Chief could not think of any. And I think, again, I have great fear and respect for chemotherapy drugs that are hazardous. And I think we need to be really careful as to what guidelines we set for that. Yeah.
What about diluting doxorubicin in fluids? I know there's some oncologists that have done that that's not uncommon at all. And doxorubicin is, I'm assuming that's very hazardous.
Then we need to change this if it's done commonly.
Well,
It is, that's the way you administer it in saline.
right. That's how we do it, and that's how I was told to do it by oncologists, so I would change that.
Okay. Then we have to remove it.
I would also say for all sterile vials in human pharmacy law, basically the beyond use date after the first puncture is 28 days, and you have to throw it away, rather than to the manufacturer's dating. Yeah, which creates another whole headache for veterinarians that like to use things down to the last drop.
Either you do a hell of a lot, or a heck of a lot, or it's tossed.
Right.
Right.
And hazardous drugs now, there is in the new 800 law, it's not just chemotherapy drugs. So they've expanded that to a whole variety of other drugs, including some really odd things like spironolactone, trilostane, which is one that you often have to compound down to size for animals. So there's now a lot of hazardous drugs that you would have to compound down to size. Spironolactone is ridiculous, but it's on the list.
So you're suggesting we change the 30 days to 28?
Well, that's just for sterile products.
Well, that's what we're talking about on this.
Yeah.
So we're going to remove number 6, but again, if anybody can think of other reasons that we're justified in doing this, forward them to me. And then 2033.7 is just the inspection authority, both the pharmacy board and the veterinary medical board.
Is the pharmacy board interested in inspecting veterinary hospitals?
I know of times where they've had joint inspections, yes.
Is that complaint driven though, or, right?
During the statutory construction, the pharmacy board did seem to indicate that they wanted some joint oversight if there was gonna be veterinary compounding. Val, do you remember that in the discussion?
It was interesting. I think they relaxed a little bit more than when we explained we're not expanding our scope of practice.
Right.
We're trying to define what we're doing. So hopefully we can continue to do that.
So then, is there maybe I missed it, if somebody's doing compounding, is there a registration that they need to notify either the pharmacy board or the veterinary medical board?
If they're a compounding pharmacist, yes.
The veterinary hospital I'm talking about.
In-house compounding,
Yes.
no. Not yet.
Just in the human pharmacy world, you have to have a sterile compounding license if you can do sterile products, but
Right.
anybody else can do non-sterile.
But veterinarians right now, we are not registering, so neither the veterinary medical board or the pharmacy board would be aware which hospitals are doing compounding. Correct?
Correct.
Which hospitals aren't doing compounding.
You want me to name? No.
Great, thank you, Dr.
Okay, thank you.
I do also have a letter from UC Davis's director of the VMTH, Dr. Jane Sykes, and she has input from the chief of anesthesia, chief of ophthalmology, chief of dermatology, of various compounded medications. So again, I think we understand the need across the board. The question is, as you've had a chance to look at this language today, hopefully you've had a chance to think about it a little bit. It's, again, extremely complicated. Do you see a piece that we're missing? That's, if this went through as such, and again, it's got a couple of warts, but if it did, does it accomplish what you perceive to be our goal? notwithstanding the shelter issue.
There were, on a prior document, we were looking at, maybe it was the federal document, with different categories of clean rooms and particulate things.
That's all in the pharmacy regulation, definitions of clean rooms and airflow and grading, that's all in the pharmacy section.
So does that pertain to veterinary hospital compounding?
If technically, if it's sterile compounding, we're supposed to comply.
So if you're mixing even something like dextrose or B-complex and fluids, you would need to comply to those regs.
Unless it's immediate use, yes.
And when they talk about immediate use, does that a completion time?
No, it has to be
Just a
administered.
start time.
Start within an hour.
Okay.
But that's the issue where we have years of history here where we have done compounding in just this way with the long track record of safety without having to have $25,000 of sterile ISO hood equipment and so on in order to accomplish that. So how do we do that when the Board of Pharmacy and USP 797 seem to have no allowances? And that's why we need this subset. But again, we have to be careful because of the whole conversation about in-clinic use for our known population versus resale. And so there's still more that we need to kind of parse out of this thing. Wanted to bring you up to speed about where we were. Any other questions, discussion from the committee at this stage?
I don't know where it's going from here. That's the question.
What I would suggest is that we continue our work and we meet with Dr. Wiebe and others from UC Davis, and we meet with Board of Pharmacy and their legal counsel, and we try and kind of present our wish list, if you will, and have some guidance and some help from those groups. Any other comments from the public on this? Okay, I don't think we need an action item for that. It's ongoing work. Let us go ahead and take a 10-minute break here or so. And just kind of stretch your legs, come back. Let's say 15, come back at 3:35. Okay. We're on item 10, discussion and consideration of proposed amendments regarding the drug information to be provided to clients, section 2032.1. In your packet, we have some proposed language regarding client information about adverse reactions to prescribed medication. That's the first page in that packet under item 10. The next few pages are a legislative initiative, and this is really information at this point. This is I don't think that this has moved forward to the legislature yet, and Mr. Stroop is here, who has been a vocal force behind Lizzie's Law, which is a law to try and this initiative to try and improve or alter the way that veterinarians communicate with clients regarding prescription medications. So he has waited patiently over the many months here because we've had a lot of other work in our queue to have his opportunity to kind of present some of his perspective about what the veterinary profession's responsibility is in terms of informed consent to clients. And so I'm going to invite him to speak, but also Dr. Wiebe, I know that UC Davis has been doing some work, and I saw a poster here of some sort from UC Davis in terms of increasing, I think, some awareness for clients as medications are prescribed. So I wanted to invite both of you, and you guys can do rock, paper, scissors to see who comes up first, to talk about this issue.
Okay, so again, I'm Dr. Valerie Wiebe, Director of Pharmacy at UC Davis, and I'm not here representing UC Davis in this capacity. This is more of a personal educational thing that I'm interested in. It just so happened when Solomon contacted the university and talked to our director, Dr. Sykes, she was very interested in the concept of basically just further educating patients and clients, and, how to do it properly, et cetera, et cetera. So because I'm in pharmacy, I wound up discussing what Solomon, Mr. Stoop, had as far as what he wanted to do. He, I think, has kind of a no-brainer. It's no cost to veterinarians. It's simple, and basically it's just asking for a poster such as this, and we've implemented one at UC Davis, which basically is, and he's got another one that he's done. With this particular one, it's basically just a patient's right to know and ask questions to the veterinarian. And what the pharmacy board does, and I'm sure you've seen probably similar posters, I don't know if they've been presented at other meetings, but this is the Board of Pharmacies page that can be downloaded right off their website for free. You can do it in color, black and white, doesn't make any difference. Post that in your exam rooms or out in the lobby, and bottom line is just informing the client that they have the right to know what their animal's getting. And if they don't, and not every veterinarian is really astute with pharmacy or pharmacology, and in lieu of that, they can also give them written educational material about it in a font that they can read. So I think it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. There aren't, and I think he's even written into the legislation that there won't be any consequences to the veterinarian for wrong data or missing data, much like they do have that. And as a human pharmacist, you can actually lose your license if you consult patients incorrectly and don't have accurate data, don't provide that to them. And I don't think that we're there yet with veterinary medicine, but I think it's certainly simple enough just to say, you guys have the right to know, and if you need to know more information, and it doesn't have to be the veterinarian giving it to them, could be their authorized authority, which I think is pretty simple. A lot of technicians are wonderful about how to go over administering insulins to patients, administering a pill to a cat, things like that. It's just simple stuff, but it really improves patient compliance. And they've found that over and over and over again in human medicine, that if the patient really understands why they're getting that medication, what can happen, what side effects to look for, a horse that's getting antibiotics, if it has diarrhea, call doctor, et cetera, et cetera. Simple little things like that are lifesavers. And I think it's going to do nothing more than maybe bring some of that concierge service back to veterinarians from the Costco's. They don't have any clue when they're counseling their patients. They don't have veterinary background. So they're counseling on things they know nothing about. And more often than not, they'll just say, well, you can ask your vet. But by then they're going home. So I think it's kind of a no-brainer.
Questions for Dr. Wiebe at this point? If you'll hold tight. Mr. Stu, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Solomon Stoop, the Lizzie Initiative for Pet Protection, and I presented this document because when I was interviewing pet owners, guardians, or clients, whenever I asked them if they would be interested in getting information about what they would give to their pets, they always said yes. And they sometimes said, well, I don't read the information for my medicines, but for my pets I would read it. And then those interviews always ended with the offer, can I sign the initiative? Can I sign the petition? And so the idea was given to me that there is something that needs to be done about this. This is independent of the Sunset Review hearings. This started before the Sunset Review hearings. And we needed 25 signatures to ask the Legislative Council to write this. And in a matter of a few minutes, we got more than 50, plus some people that are not registered voters that were almost begging to sign it, but they can't because it's a requirement to be a registered voter in California in order to sign that request. Some people have told me that they want this to happen because sometimes they feel that the veterinarian thinks that the client is a veterinarian. In other words, they think that the client has to know everything and understand that the veterinarian is doing. And I think that's, in a nutshell, a pretty good way of explaining where is this informational loophole. Some clients say that sometimes for some medicines, only the positive aspects are announced. So, as you all know, this situation that I went through with Convenia, in that specific case, I feel, and other people feel, that this starts with a script. I have an injection for this. That's how it starts. And then sometimes they talk about being long-acting, but they never talk about what happens if there are adverse effects. What is the additional risk? And much even less to make the statement that I got from Plum's Veterinary Drugs, that if I would have known this, and I'm carrying here Lizzie's tag, she would have liked that I had been told, because the drug can persist in the body for up to 65 days, adverse reactions may occur that require prolonged treatment. If I would have received that information, I would have said no. It's not enough just to say that it is long-acting or extended release. It's what that implies. And I hope with my foreign accent I can relate it. I don't know if I should speak closer or farther because of the foreign accent. Is what that implies. As the UC Davis poster says, what are the relevant risks? And some people feel that when the idea of convenience presented is some sort of a preemptive framing that only talks about the good things. Sometimes I have been trying to look for an analogy that when there are adverse effects with a extended release drug, it's like literally chemically waterboarding the pet. Because if the body of the pet cannot take it, it's like saying, you didn't like it, here is more. You didn't like it, here is more. It's like it's some sort of a chemical waterboarding. Now, I have a request because I know that tomorrow the Waterhouse administration starts, right? It's true. And I respectfully request that I always hear, and I have talked about this with some people that I respect a lot. The conversations here have a lot of legal language, a formality that sometimes I feel that I have to have a law degree, at least from Princeton. And I want to invite you to realize that we, the consumers, are not lawyers. And we need to understand everything in a very simple language. And I want to ask that that same rigorosity that is used when you talk about several things be applied to the rights of the consumer, to be as rigorous in protecting the right to be informed of the consumer, and to do that in a language that the consumer can understand. Not all consumers have a degree not all consumers have a sophisticated language. And please, I ask that a consideration of this request, so that it be implemented. And of course, I want to wish the new president of the Veterinary Board the best. I sometimes, backtracking for a moment to this issue of the long-acting drugs, I think that sometimes they may need to be reclassified as a higher risk or more dangerous drug. I don't think a long-acting drug where the consumer needs to understand that if there is an adverse reaction, you are stuck, is the same thing as injecting something or giving a medicine that is not extended release or long-acting. And I think you should consider reclassifying extended release drugs. I know that Zoetis is a very prestigious lab. I have always said that Clavamox helped Lizzie a lot, and I don't have anything against the laboratory, but I know that they are very splendid and they promote a lot of events and help veterinary medicine a lot. But I think in the specific case of Convinia, it must be reclassified. That's what I have for saying at this moment. Thank you. And obviously, I am open to questions and to listen to all of you. I've learned to listen a lot.
Any questions for Dr. Wiebe? You want to sit back down?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Stoop? So, Mr. Stoop, we do have language that we have offered here under what is called the veterinary client-patient relationship. And there's a section of that that discusses the prescribing of drugs. And a new sentence in there is a veterinarian or RVT shall provide information to the client regarding potential adverse reactions to the prescribed drug. It's one sentence. It has not been discussed by this committee at all, so it's not been accepted. But my question for you is, with this particular sentence here, does that fill the need that you see in your initiative?
Can you repeat it, please?
A veterinarian or RVT shall provide information to the client regarding potential adverse reactions to the prescribed drug.
Well, I don't think it's enough because I think the consumer needs to know why it's not just about adverse effects. The consumer needs to know what it does, why is it necessary. The consumer needs to know, well, I guess, I don't know if it should include about differentiating between long-acting or extended release and short-acting, right, or standard. I know that there is legally I know that the issue of the weight, the age and the weight and the kidney and liver functions are requirements under current law that the veterinarian has to watch those. But that is from the disciplinary point of view. And you may remember when I testified in the Sunset hearings, I talked about the preventative approach. To think just about the disciplinary approach is not enough. So I think if you want to solve the situation through a regulation, such what you're proposing, it should talk a lot about informing more, not just knowing that it's forbidden. It's not that we know that it's forbidden to run a stoplight, right? But we need to know that it's forbidden to run a stoplight. We need to know that there is a fine for not doing that. and that you need to look for the stoplight, and you need to look for the red sign. So it's not just that it's illegal to run a stoplight, but the consumer has to be told that there is a stoplight that exists, and to share information about that with the consumer, and not that the prohibition of ignoring that is just something between the board and the veterinarian. I don't know if I was able to explain my point in a way that, in other words,
I think you explained your point well. I'll respectfully disagree. I will have you go back to when Lizzie had her negative reaction to the medicine. My guess is one of the first people that you called was the veterinarian. And I will, because Lizzie wasn't doing well. And I will tell you that as a prescriber of medication, I'm on the short list with the client when that medication causes some sort of unintended or unexpected effect. So we are not, I will defend the profession and say we are not sitting here waiting to get into trouble, because it is not good for our patients, and it's not good for our clients, and quite frankly, it's not good for our business if an animal has a bad reaction to any medication we prescribe. So we're not here just trying to prevent getting our knuckles wrapped. But I do have one other question for you.
can I just say one comment? This is a comment from a consumer,
right?
By the way, from the Sacramento area. It's a very interesting comment. This consumer said to me, you know, I like this idea very much of the poster, but I don't think this poster should be just at the entrance of the veterinary facility. I think it should be in the examining room, because that will remind the veterinarian and the consumer about these issues. What I'm saying with this is that it's not, because it's not, my claim is that it's not enough that the veterinarian know that it's illegal to prescribe, I think for a time longer than 1 year or something, but that the consumer know about that. So we disagree on that. But you have another question.
Yeah, my other question actually was regarding the poster. So
Yes.
this one sentence that I read to you, plus that poster, do you believe that that is enough informed consent for a client?
I don't like informed consent.
What kind of consent do
You are asking me, I am providing the answer.
Yeah.
I don't like the informed consent, because informed consent is an advisory that doesn't have the weight of any law. And this is something that many consumers don't know and the public doesn't know. And I found out about this as a result of the letter that the CVMA sent to me, and I salute the CVMA. But the informed consent is just an advisory. And I prefer that this be more of seen as a minimum standard, as opposed to informed consent. So the poster in a line that I think needs to be fine-tuned, I think would put the situation on the right track. Notice that I am talking on the poster about instructions in writing, because one of the comments that I have received from consumers is that when they get home, they don't remember what they were told. And that is a very important comment, because well, anybody can have memory lapses, but as you know, many people that are retired have pets, and you cannot ignore this growing population that has made those comments. Everything that I talk about here is based on people that I talk to. I've learned to learn from others. They have told me all these things, and we cannot ignore that, I think. So the poster, I think, is an essential part of this, of solving this gap or loophole. there are other comments that some consumers have made to me, and I would like to be sincere even if I get kicked out. Some consumers have told me that sometimes the board acts as if they don't understand what I am talking about. Sometimes to take this attitude of I don't understand what is being discussed by some people. And I share this because consumers talk about this. And I think that this measure that you are proposing should also bring about some healing to that feeling that you do care about consumers, that you do care about the fact that pets are considered members of the family, and that consumers have the inherent right to protect those that they love. And if they happen to love pets instead of a child, then they have to have that information in order to protect their pet. We talked about this when I talked about the Pets Act on July 20th, about the fact that the Pets Act is a recognition that pets are members of the family. So
I think other committee members would like to ask questions.
Sure.
Sir, so I think I understand, I know I understand your motivation behind this. And I think I understand some of the scope that you would like to see promulgated. My question would be directly then, is the emphasis more on the prescription of drugs in general, or do your concerns extend into the hospital setting where perhaps critically ill animals would be maintained and they might need certain drugs at certain points of time that one could not foresee? And do you think then that the owners need to be informed at that moment about these drugs? Sometimes these situations are life-threatening.
a few hours ago you were saying, and I was watching you on the train, you said something about being a responsible pet owner. Well, anything that has to do with being a responsible pet owner is what I expect out of this. That you help the pet owner to be responsible by informing the pet owner. Because in order to be a responsible pet owner, the pet owner needs that information. Now, I am talking on the initiative specifically about non-emergency outpatient situations. And I want to focus on that part. Hospitals, I don't want to, at this moment, I don't want to emphasize that. I am talking about the fact that I don't want to feel what I have, I don't want other people to feel what I was forced to feel, that I walked Lizzie to the gallows because I was not informed about something. And that makes me an irresponsible client, but because I was not provided the information. Not because I wanted to be responsible, but the system made an irresponsible dynamics, so that feeling that one walks the pet to the gallows because one is not informed, one is not a responsible client because of the system, not because of the client.
Mr. Stoop, can I ask a question
Yes.
about the initiative that you got 25 signatures, which is what was required to get Ledge
Well,
Council to
it's
draft
got
it?
more than 50 and we had to stop because other people wanted to sign.
Okay, so let me move on from there. So that was enough signatures to get Ledge Council to draft this language. How many signatures do you need to get this on the ballot?
365,880.
365,880.
And I want to add to your question that companies that have been approached for collecting those signatures have said that getting signatures for this is easier than any of the initiatives that were on the last election.
So, just so I'm clear, if your intent is to move forward with a ballot measure,
Yes.
which that may be where you're going with this, then are you still expecting or requesting that the Veterinary Medical Board do something in their Practice Act? And I want to clarify something. You talked about, I want this to be a minimum standard. And you came to my office a couple months ago and we sat down and we talked about what a regulation is. It's not informed consent, where you said it doesn't have the full force and effect of the law. And I explained to you that a regulation put into this particular section that we're talking about is in fact part of a minimum standard. So I want to go back and respond to your uncomfortableness, if you will, that this would be just a suggestion and not a minimum standard. So when something, wait a minute.
Let me
When
just
something
tell,
is a minimum standard, it means the expectation is that that is met. It is not a reactive type of provision.
if you solve this problem,
Mhm.
that's what is the most important thing. I have been told by people that know much more than me that thousands of pets have died because of this. The important thing is not how we're going to call the solution. The important thing is that it be solved. If this is solved, I will talk to the people that are involved in this too, and I know that the ballot initiative will cease. But until it is not solved, the process will continue. But once it's solved, it's solved. And I have said this before, and I talk about this again. I have invested a lot of time, resources. I have traveled a lot. I have sent more letters that my computers can handle. And I have had to put up with some situations that I think that you should have been the ones that solved this issue in the board. And I think that I have done a lot of this work for you to create the awareness. And I get constantly people thanking me for doing this. So I respectfully ask to you to add 6 letters of the name Lizzie to your solution. I do this because I think that, first of all, is a pet that was the victim of the lack of regulations for this. But I have also done a lot of work for you, even though I am not on your payroll.
You don't know how much we're getting paid for this either.
Let me tell you, I will put up with whatever you want to give me.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
I sometimes get caught up in the mechanics of things.
Yes.
I think I have trouble with the philosophical part, but the mechanics I look at. So I look at this sentence, or even more if we can add to it.
Yes.
And then I try to figure out, as a enforcement board, consumer protection, how are we going to administer this? So what is the expectation of even this sentence we have right here? Does this, I mean, in order, and I've got the plums here for cephalexin, so I know exactly what the adverse reactions are. So when I look at this, it sort of implies to me that I need to do a blood test and a urinalysis on every animal before I can prescribe a medication, even if it's a healthy animal that has a urinary tract infection. So that's what this sentence that's already there says to me, is that I'm going to have to protect myself if I'm using any medication.
You know that it says here that there's no liability, right?
No.
For the information, but if you have, but I think veterinarians have to be careful. I mean, sometimes, I mean, there is a risk with any medication, and we know that. There is some percent that is a risk. I don't think the obstacles, and I know that there are, and I am not saying to you that veterinarians should not be protected. I am not saying that. But I think that there has to be a way where the veterinarian gives something to sign to the client, that the information is given, that there is not a 100% certainty, something that protects the veterinarian. This initiative is not about attacking veterinarians. It's not about humiliating any veterinarian, and it's not about making veterinarians do things that human beings cannot do. This initiative is about some information that must be shared, and that is all. I know that there are questions and things to solve, but I don't think that the client should be deprived of information because of certain obstacles. And there are always disclaimers to sign and ways to protect the veterinarian. And I have said before, I have met some veterinarians that are beautiful people. This initiative is about helping the pet and the pet owner be a responsible pet owner. A responsible, not irresponsible, right? With an A. I hope I am spelling it correctly.
Yeah. There is always liability. When I walk into any room, I am assuming, when I establish the VCPR, I am assuming liability. And in order for me to satisfy this sentence, I need to know what is going to satisfy my liability with this sentence. Okay? I don't know of any release that gets me off of liability.
Well, but I don't want here to start this situation where we're going to get into a biased fallacy, where because of that, you cannot solve this. I am saying, Dr. Sullivan, that the veterinarian has the right to be protected. But because of that, not providing pharmaceutical information will not, Now, I know that there are issues and there are legal problems. I know that. I mean, these things are not that easy, but at the same time, they are a right of the consumer. So some legal way has to be found. And you say that you don't know of any disclaimer. Well,
I mean, if
that's a big statement, right? And I am not a lawyer, as I have told you, and I don't want to get trapped into legal battles here or legal debates because I am not a lawyer.
and I'm not either, but when you said some kind of a release, when that client signs a release, it doesn't change my liability. I am still responsible for caring for that animal. And if there is a mistake made, that release isn't going to release me of the liability. So what I'm trying to get at is what is my responsibility in informing that client that satisfies, when I read this initiative, it says that I'm going to have to do a lot more than just talk about the medication I'm giving. There's a lot involved here. And, we always are looking at, and I don't want to be negative, I want to.
Well, you are being a little bit, yeah.
But there are unintended consequences with things like this. And in this case, we're talking about the cost of veterinary medicine.
Okay.
So if I may jump in, Section 1707.2, which is not in your Practice Act, because it's in the Pharmacy Practice Act, is duty to consult. And it states, a pharmacist shall provide oral consultation to his or her patient or the patient's agent, and of course, we're not talking to the dog or the cat, we're talking to their agent, the owner, in all care settings, 1, upon request, or 2, when the pharmacist, and again, we can substitute the word veterinarian here, deems it is warranted in the exercise of his or her professional judgment. And it goes further on to state that when oral consultation is provided, it shall include the following: directions for use and storage and the importance of compliance with the directions. And 2, precautions and relevant warnings, including common severe side or adverse effects or interactions that may be encountered. Okay, so that's pharmacy law on the human side. What you have offered in the legislative document actually goes, it would appear, far beyond what's on the human side. And I would agree that we are prescribing medications, we should comply with the reasonable expectations that goes with those medications. But it is also difficult to inform clients about adverse effects that are unknown or difficult to anticipate and so on and so forth.
And you're saying that you cannot communicate that through a disclaimer to the client?
Well, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying
okay,
that
that's the point. It's because the public thinks that there is always a way for the veterinary board to get off the hook with this. I am telling you, and I am not lying, what the people say on the street. So that's why some people said to me, you're trying to do this, good luck, good luck. Well, I know that there are ways to get off the hook, but I think there has to be a way where the respect to the right to be informed is observed. It's a right that exists since the 1960s, since the Kennedy administration. It was not only endorsed but expanded by the United Nations, and there has to be a way of finding a door for informing the consumer.
and I have asked you specifically.
Well, it's because you are asking me, Dr. Klimborg,
Right.
precisely what I am asking. I am not a lawyer.
Right, so now
And so don't force me to answer a
So-
question that is for a
you
group
have-
of lawyers.
you have
And
a
don't use that as an excuse not to inform the consumers.
So it sounds to me like I could give you a whole list of things that perhaps we could do, but your answer today is going to be, I don't know because I'm not a doctor and I'm not a
I
lawyer.
knew from the beginning, Dr. Klimborg, that today was a day where you were going to, I mean, this group, or some of you, were going to try to corner me into the legal corner.
Not at all.
I knew that from the beginning, and I don't have the answer for the legal problem, but I have the request from the public and from the consumers to be informed about pharmaceutical risks. Maybe this will require a bill, which is, as you know, a possibility, because we are talking about something that we don't know what the legislature, if they are going to accept your recommendation, and I don't have obviously control of the legislature. The legislature may come up with some way of solving this. So maybe there is a need, maybe this is a door that can be explored, that the legislature consider some law or something that will allow the veterinarian to feel protected, and that the veterinarian can share that information. But to deny the pharmaceutical information,
Which nobody has discussed doing.
well, but you have postponed. I mean, when I say you, it's not you personally, right?
Yes, and that's the deal, is that you don't know what these people sitting at this table are doing, and you don't know what handouts I'm sending home with.
I know what you haven't done, which is you haven't solved the problem, Dr. Klimborg. I don't know. I know that you haven't done that. That I know.
Yeah.
And I think that it's time that you solve this problem.
Dr. Sullivan.
Hang on, before, just let me just jump in here for a legal perspective. Mr. Stoop has given his sort of explanation on his, your initiative. He has also commented, sorry, I step on taking a important phone call. He has also suggested that our attempt to solve the problem is inadequate. I think would that be a fair?
I think that it has to be expanded with the poster, definitely, as you said.
So, as this committee's lawyer and as the board's lawyer, I think what we have to be cognizant of, we're not passing judgment on what Mr. Stoop is doing. This is not, we're not grilling him about why he went in a certain direction. He is circulating this under the rights of the California Constitution, under the initiative, referendum, and recall, part of the Reform Act in the 1920s and early years, about the cattle barons going back in history. So what's before the board, for the committee, is this, okay? One person has commented that this is inadequate. That would be Mr. Stoop. So before we go too much further about the validity of this, because Mr. Stoop has indicated that until the Veterinary Medical Board solves the problem, this is still in play. Is that
It's currently under revision at the Office of the Secretary of State.
correct? So I think I would advise this committee moving forward, since we're not agendized to actually vote on this or pass judgment on this, why don't we focus on what is in front of us, which is this? Why don't we take some more public comment, if there is any, we'll take some action. And then Mr. Stoop can walk away knowing that either he's gonna continue on with his endeavor here, or he won't continue on, or whatever action he will take. But in all candor, I'm not sure that debating the merits of this is overly prudent, because in some respects, it's sort of outside the jurisdiction of the Veterinary Medical Board a little bit, because it's out there that may be circulated for signatures. You've commented that signature gathering will be very easy, so I'll leave that at that. I just want to make sure that the board takes action on what it's agendized to take action on, which is respectfully not on the merits of this. I don't want to comment on the merits of this. Certainly comment on the merits of this. We've had one comment. Perhaps Dr. Weeby made a comment that's inadequate as well, so I'm not sure, okay? That would be my advice, members.
There have been a few of us that have researched how we can do this. I'm going to just throw something out to see if it works along the line of this sentence, because we have to figure out a mechanics for this or addition to this. You are familiar with Plum's pharmaceutical.
I am a consumer that simply knows that Plums has good information.
Right.
I am not an expert on Plums, and I am not a veterinarian, and I am not a lawyer.
Okay,
Those three things.
But what I'm getting at is you're aware of that.
Yeah, that's why I have it here.
Okay, and I have talked to a company who has all of this information digitally, and I discussed it with them in relation to this, and asked them if the information that is there for the public to read, adverse effects or whatever, if that can be formulated to help us satisfy a possible legislative requirement. Their answer was that it is in their plans, but they don't have people working on it right now. It's on the shelf. But that if we came up with a regulation that would say that if a client requests this, that we could produce this, I think the technology is there to get it to the public. Is this something that would be appealing to you and work towards satisfying what I'm understanding is a concern of yours?
One of the first conversations that I had with Dr. Klimborg, and I always thank you, is that when I came on July 20th to the meeting, you approached me and we were talking about this situation, and I mentioned to Dr. Klimborg that it should be mandatory to have maybe, I talked about the physician's desk reference, the veterinary version, mandatory to have it. So I am telling you this short story because I obviously think that the more information the consumer has, even though Plums would have to embark on a project, that is a good thing. And if they work on something that is in the simplest possible language, of course, anything that has to do with informing the pet owner, anything that expands the understanding of the medication, it's a great idea. We are in the age of information where all this information can be sent through a text message, through an email, I mean, there are millions of ways now to and maybe some consumers have said that maybe there should be a website developed by one of these plums or the PDR, and I think the other one that is highly respected is Saunders. That maybe there can be a website where the client is directed to visit to get the information. That's one of the comments from the public, and I think it's an interesting approach. That the veterinarians say, okay, the information about this product, you can find it in this website, in this veterinary hospital or clinic has this arrangement that all our clients have access to it, and you can look for that information. So of course, if they develop anything that helps, from my perspective, I welcome that. And I think that the legislature would like something like that, where expanded access to information is given to the client, and it's not just any website or any type of information. It's information that is considered of serious information, highly regarded or professional. So I don't know if I answered what you are.
Well, then the other question I would have is,
Dick, we've got other consumers in the audience. Mr. Stoop,
Yes.
I want to thank you.
Thanks to you.
And let's give the chance for other consumers to speak.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
In the meantime, if we want to talk within ourselves, if you have comments, then.
Yeah, the comment I would have is in our packets, we received some very simple, basic information. And now we've received a whole bunch of new ideas that I think I'd like a little time to take a look at. Some of them sound very interesting. Your information you just presented, Doctor, is very intriguing. And I like the language you brought up from the pharmacy board, but that's just like a first read of it. I'd kind of like to have it in print in front of me to sit over a cup of coffee and take a look at. So I guess what I'm saying is we collect as much information as we can today, but I'd like some more time to take a look at this to see which is exactly the best approach. I'm not sure just this one simple statement is going to address all the necessary needs, and also looking at the consequences of what that simple statement is.
Any other comments?
I have a comment. The proposed sentence in 2032.1, I don't know what statute it explains or amplifies, so it may be beyond the scope of a regulation.
Anything from the public at this point? Yes?
Sorry, I'll be brief. It just mentioned the veterinary client-patient relationship, a known owner, and throwing the shelter monkey wrench into everything. There are times when we have a microchip with owner information, but we cannot reach that owner. Would that, in fact, I would like us to take a look and make sure that would not affect our treatment of patients under our care because we can't reach a known owner.
I think doesn't the last line in A 2032.1, the VCPR, where it says except where the patient is a wild animal or the owner is unknown?
Right, but if there's a microchip in the animal, that information is an identifying factor for the animal's owner.
I think you already talked
So-
This is already on our list of
Is
shelter
that-
issues.
All
Yeah,
right.
on our very original documents, because we have animals that are legally seized and we're required by law to treat them. We have animals that are taken out of an apartment or a backyard, therefore they are owned. And this is already on the list to discuss.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's
excellent.
already
Thank you.
aware. Thank you.
So what I think it sounds like we need, yes, great. Come on down.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Hello, Ken Pulowski, President of the California Veterinary Medical Association. And, I'm not opposed at all for clients having more information available. I think that's always a good idea. I would encourage you to look further into the language that you brought up, Dr. Klingborg, from the pharmacy board and was brought up by Mr. Johnson as well. I think that that gives some good guidance. We often follow what other boards set in motion, and I think that that would be some good language to look at and pursue.
Great. Other comments from the public?
Dr. Klingborg, would you repeat that code section 1707?
1707.2, duty to consult.
And what was PLUMS? That was
PLUMS is a
referred-
reference to a veterinary formulary which lists all the drugs and the adverse reactions and why you would use the drug and all of that. So it's basically a dictionary of medications that a veterinarian might prescribe.
Is it an acronym?
That's the name of the author.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where is it found?
You can find it on Amazon. It's a book. It's a book. Yeah. It's a dictionary of medications, so.
Oh, it's like a
It's like a PDR.
PDR.
Yeah. So what I would like to do, because we've collected a lot of information here today, and we do agree that this is a serious issue, and we do agree that the consumer needs the right kinds of information to make appropriate choices on behalf of their pets. And as the prescribers of those medications, it's up to us to provide that information. I don't think that we have any problems with those statements. But we need a subcommittee for this. So I would like to get a couple of people to throw their hat in the ring as a subcommittee to look into this. Jeff, Dr. Pollard, and Bill. That's not nice. Yeah.
What?
Poor Dr. Pollard already has to work with Dr. Grant on one subcommittee. That's not, and Dr. Sullivan. So Drs. Pollard and Sullivan will take a look at that. I would like that. Actually, do I need a motion on that? I don't. Good. All right. So we're good on that at this point. Any questions? Okay. I know that some people have flights to catch, right? Okay. But we're going to try and start our conversation on anesthesia here. And as you need to exit, please do so. So we had, we're not going to get to item number 12, the spay-neuter issue, but let's talk about induction of anesthesia versus sedation. Dr. Drusi's, this was one that I seem to remember really kind of came up as part of the shelter conversation as well.
Indeed it did. And, you know, with an immense amount of respect to Dr. Sullivan, I do not disagree with his position. And certainly by the summaries that have been provided in our packet substantiate his position. My only point is where the rubber meets the road, where you don't take precise weights on these animals, either in the field or oftentimes in an unruly animal in the shelter, the differentiation between sedation and anesthesia is a line so thin that nobody can see it. And for all intensive purposes, they are the same in a shelter. And I think this, further complicates the issue. But again, there's no one size that's going to fit all in this.
And so again, I think the issue here is that we're comfortable with the notion of animals being sedated without a veterinarian being present. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's the issue of them being anesthetized, because only an RVT can induce anesthesia, but they cannot maintain anesthesia.
Well,
Well, that's again, I want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing here.
correct. RVT can induce anesthesia.
Without a veterinarian.
Right.
Yes.
He's talking about without a veterinarian being present.
Right.
So we need to make sure that we're clarifying that, because
You
he
guys,
said it, but he did not finish his full thought on that process, and so.
my example to you guys that may not have been here, or the public listening, is that dog that comes in all matted up. It can hardly move because it's so painful from the mats. It needs to be anesthetized in order for it to be adequately treated. And that fine line between sedation and anesthesia, I feel is completely arbitrary and unenforceable. And it's just a matter of semantics as to which side of the table one wants to speak from as to represent what is actually happening.
And so it ends up being tied in most specifically in the shelter setting, where those animals do require a level of anesthesia, and yet there isn't a veterinarian there.
It's a Sunday afternoon when these dogs come in.
And so we maybe are getting a little ahead of ourselves as we get into that shelter proposal that will be forthcoming in terms of some scope of practice stuff. But just the same, we thought we needed to at least start to have a conversation, because sedation versus anesthesia there isn't this clear line, and we at least needed to kind of educate ourselves about the definitions of these words and how we were going to be using them in the future. I don't know that we're going to agree that we can draw a line in the sand on one or the other, but we at least needed to look at some language and have some comfort level about the definitions.
My position would be that we don't need to draw a line in the sand. A simple solution in this best of all possible worlds would be for the board to permit RVTs to render an animal under anesthesia to allow these procedures to take place.
Conversation. Yeah, Dave.
The only points I wanted to add were just kind of from a historical perspective. This was probably one of the most discussed topics and contentious topics when job tasks were originated. And believe me, we got input from board certified anesthesiologists, veterinarians, RVTs, the lay public. This issue went on and on and on. And these definitions that were put forth were the best that were available at that time and seem to work well for all of these years. But again, the intention was to define what was going on in private practice, not necessarily. In those days, the shelters were basically capture and kill. It may sound very blunt, but there just was not veterinary medicine being practiced at the time these regulations went in. I think now that there's a whole new set of drugs out there that didn't exist when these regulations were put in, I think we need to look at that issue, how those drugs are applied and in what combination, and what do they create? Do they create a level of sedation or do they create anesthesia? But I think the other factor that we need to bring into this is intent. What do you intend to do with the drugs you have? If your intention is to anesthetize the patient because of what you're seeing in front of you, then yes, there probably should be a veterinarian present. But if you are sedating the animal, and because of the animal's condition or the animal's weight or additional drugs, it slides into anesthesia, that was not your original intention. But that's what the end product was to get the job done, that second injection of medication to prolong it. And so I think there's a lot of issues to discuss and look at it from a whole new perspective in terms of the drugs that are available today, the access to those drugs, and what situation they're used. And then again, it gets back to what we've been constantly talking about, what may be appropriate for a shelter setting because of the requirement of appropriate, prompt and necessary veterinary care versus what's allowed in a private setting, maybe two different standards.
I'm uncomfortable with two different standards. To kind of address this, I think sometimes we forget that that animal that's coming into the shelter, in some cases, is an owned animal, and the owner's going to be showing up the next day or two. So I think a lot of times we talk about a different level of practice at a shelter than in a private practice, and that makes me uncomfortable. So the question is, and maybe it's even more basic, does it matter if it's, as far as regulatory, our job on the board is if there is a problem, if something happens, whether it's sedation or a general anesthetic, and there is not a veterinarian on the premises, and that is an owned animal, whose license is on the line? Because our job is to go after is to look for that license.
My license is on the line. It's my premise permit, it's my DEA license, it's my veterinary license. That's on the line. But I am also required to administer prompt and necessary veterinary care. And there, even in the Riverside shelter, there is not a veterinarian there 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there certainly isn't one in Blythe. I mean, there is a veterinarian in Blythe, but I can't get them to come to the shelter. It's an access issue.
Dr. Sullivan? Yeah, I would agree with you that, double standards are a little bit tricky, but I think there's ways to address some of your concerns. I can tell you, again, I can only speak from my experiences, but there are policy ways to deal with these. In other words, an owned animal is an animal that has a microchip taken out of a house or a yard, has a license tag that connects to an owner. That could be how we could look at a owned animal. I can tell you by policy, when I was in charge, if there was not a veterinarian on premise, that animal needed to be anesthetized, and it met one of those criteria where it profiled, I can tell you, people in the room that work at a shelter, and they're nodding their heads, they can tell you which animals are owned and which animals are not owned. It's very distinct. If that was an owned animal that needed to be anesthetized, it was shipped out to an emergency clinic or a private veterinary practice if there was not a veterinarian. That was our method of dealing with prompt and necessary veterinary care. If it was a stray animal and profiled as a stray animal and needed to be anesthetized or heavily sedated, it was kept in-house. So there are ways of dealing with your concerns.
Jennifer and then Christy.
I know with the double standard in shelter medicine, we're going back to exigent circumstances, and in some cases, the time it would take to get to an emergency clinic is not in the best interest of the animal. And if, again, I was researching military medicine, we wouldn't expect a nurse in the battlefield to do the same things as your nurse at Kaiser when you're going in for an appointment. They are two separate standards, and I think in shelter medicine, a separate standard is a necessity.
The part that concerns me when we talk about two separate standards is you all sitting up here have great standards, and we know that. And the people that we hear from are usually the higher standard. But we heard from a group last meeting, and there were a couple of them that came up and said that some of these shelters without veterinarians should not exist. They admitted to that. And so we have to remember that's what we have to say. There still has to be minimum standards for them, just like there are minimum standards for a hospital setting. And so you have exceptional leadership, you have exceptional protocols, and you have a veterinarian that comes in however often that may be, or however, infrequently that is. There are some out there that don't. And those are the ones that scare me, because they're going to use these exceptions and these double standards in any way possible that they can skimp. They will do that. And those are the ones that scare me when we create double standards.
Yes.
Well, actually, is this on?
Yes.
First, I've been out in the field for a little while, but you can tell if a dog's come in, it's 2 years old and it's never been groomed in its life.
Sorry, can you restate your name for the?
I'm sorry, this is Tuesday. Cool, I'm in RVT.
Okay, thank you.
Frequently, animals come in, they're 2 years old, they've never been groomed in their entire life, and you are the first medical person they've ever seen, and having the ability to be able to anesthetize them and groom them and relieve a lot of pain. Their stomachs are macerated, they're in horrific pain, and you've got to do that pretty quickly. These are not owned animals. If they're owned, they're poorly owned, and the owners are not coming back for them. And there are probably shelters who should not exist. Definitely, I've probably been in them. But they probably don't have access to the drugs we're talking about anyway. And they don't necessarily have a relationship with a veterinarian. And we're still talking about working under the preview of a veterinarian. And shelter medicine has come a long way, and there's some really good shelter veterinarians that are helping us and guiding us in our work. So.
Thank you. I'm a little troubled by exigent. I just have to say there are some days when during cold and flu season, it feels like half my staff calls in sick, and yet the same number of patients come in, and it feels very exigent to me too.
You know what that's like.
So yeah, we have to be careful. It feels like a battlefield some days in my office as well. So as we continue this conversation, I understand the point that you're making, and I think it's a good one. But as we continue that conversation, we need to be very careful about when we trigger something that says, okay, now your standard can change. And of course, that's stating the obvious, but we need to make sure that we have clarity on that. Yes, Jennifer.
I'll start saying emergent.
Thank you.
I think that the point that I'm making is that with shelter medicine, we don't get to pick and choose what comes in. We're solving society's problem. Everything comes in. People find a back door propped open and slip in trying to hand you an animal that's injured. But to Christy's point about some of these shelters that should not be operating, maybe the solution is the premise permit. We should focus on that. The ones that have a premise permit, who have a veterinarian who's willing to be responsible, should maybe be the ones that these regulations are drafted toward.
For Kurt and I think that we're trying to figure out the issue we're trying to solve is that there really isn't a clear demarcation anymore between sedation and anesthesia, right? And that some of the drugs we're using sedate to the point of being knocked unconscious. And more than just RVTs are doing this. Is that where we're at today?
Sounds like in the shelter setting that's possible.
I wouldn't deny that possibility.
Okay, so that we're clear for the viewing public and even for Kurt and I, what are we trying to solve? Because that's where we need to focus the issue that we're trying to solve. Are we trying to get a different definition of sedation so that it's clear who should be using these drugs and under what situations? Or are we trying to limit this to RVTs only? I'm trying to figure out what we're trying to solve here. Are we looking at perhaps sedation should be included in one of the limited RVT tasks? And right now, because sedation is not defined anywhere in the Practice Act, it's very confusing as to who can sedate versus who can anesthetize. Is that why we're having the discussion? Someone better know.
No,
And I would
yes, it's not that simple. Like I said before, I agree with Dr. Sullivan 100%. That there's a difference, theoretical difference. But I'm talking about where the rubber meets the road on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock when, whatever it is, whether it's a matted dog or whether it's a skin laceration on some dog that is so uncontrollably ill-tempered that you have to knock them down.
So who has to? Are you saying an RVT?
Somebody has to. Well, let's start with an RVT. I mean, I'm not going to jump in take that quantum leap and say right here and now that it should be unlicensed veterinary assistants. Hell no. But I'm suggesting that we at least begin the discussion with RVTs.
And now we're getting to the crux of the issue. So the problem here is, as it stands today in the Practice Act under CCR 2036, an RVT can only do this theoretically if we're saying that sedation and anesthesia can be synonymous with the drugs we have today. The problem we have is that it can only be done under the direct supervision of a veterinarian.
Correct.
So that's the first problem we're trying to solve, perhaps. The second issue is, should anybody else be allowed to play in that sandbox, to sedate an animal to the point of unconsciousness without monitoring airways or whatever else needs to be done?
I think it would.
If the animal is anesthetized.
I think it would be irresponsible of me to suggest at this point in time that unlicensed assistants, veterinary assistants, I know, be permitted to do the same thing as RVTs when we just had a discussion earlier today that there are no criteria to establish oneself as a VA.
So then the discussion really today, as I understand it, is limited to, first of all, defining sedation, and secondly, examining or at least assessing whether or not an RVT may be able to sedate an animal without being under direct supervision. So that's really what we're talking about.
If you choose to use the word sedation or anesthetize.
Right, and because they now seem to be interchangeable, I mean, when I look at this as a non-veterinarian, non-medical professional, when I look at these definitions that Dr. Klingborg provided, I see a clear line of demarcation, that being loss of consciousness is anesthesia. Anything above that is sedation. Whether or not it's a depression of consciousness or a lack of consciousness, it's not complete loss of consciousness. That's anesthesia. Now, if that's not a clear definition anymore, then maybe we need to talk about defining sedation or using the term sedation and anesthesia interchangeably. Because at this point, I'm not sure what we're trying to solve. And I think we need to be clear about why we're having the discussion in terms of what we're trying to solve.
I agree 100%. It's the same as accredited and recognized. I mean, when you start using these terms interchangeably, then no one knows what you're really talking about.
And it seems to me that at some point in time, these were defined very differently. There's definitions for them separate and apart from one another.
Next week, I will be in the shelter business 18 years.
Okay.
When I started in the shelter business, it was a completely different environment. You're right about the catch and kill. Cats were treated like second-class life forms. They were nuked almost as quickly as they could be impounded. There was no veterinary care. We didn't vaccinate on impound. We didn't do anything. It's the progression of the profession in the shelters. That's been my goal is to make shelter medicine a respectable segment of the veterinary profession. And we can only do this by allowing professionals to do what's right for the animals and what's right for the owners.
So to get to your point, Anne Marie, a couple things. There are a number of drugs out there that are classified as sedatives, and in every formulary, et cetera, they're going to be labeled as sedatives, yet given an appropriate, a high enough dose, they can induce anesthesia. So they cross that line. And those drugs are, and so we also have a situation where what we've heard is we need an opportunity and ability for RVTs, particularly in the shelter setting, to be able to induce anesthesia under indirect supervision when an animal comes in and they are badly matted and they need immediate grooming care. And so the conversation really got to the fact that because sedation isn't spelled out, it's okay for RVTs to induce sedation, or whatever we want to call it. That's fine. But when that same drug is given at such a dose that it causes anesthesia, that's where Dave's point about intent comes into play. And I don't know that anybody is critical if there was an unintentional induction of anesthesia. But Dr. Druces has said we actually need our RVTs under indirect supervision, and you can correct me if I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly. We actually need RVTs under indirect supervision, at least in the shelter setting, to be able to induce anesthesia, because there are some animals that just can't wait for a veterinarian to get there and provide the level of supervision necessary.
That's absolutely correct. But I would qualify that one step further, is that we allow animal control officers with less training and less knowledge to do essentially the same thing in the field with a dart gun. That we don't allow our RVTs, and believe me, I'm not following them around in my car, so they're out there on their own. But the RVT in a shelter situation is prohibited from doing essentially the same thing in the shelter.
So this ends up being a discussion about an RVT job task.
Correct.
Okay. So, having gotten to that point, here's the deal. We still need to open this up for public comment about anything that's not on the agenda, right? Isn't that something that has to happen at the end of this whole show?
Yes, we must tackle public items, public comment items not on the agenda.
Okay. So, we're going to table this at this stage of the game, having finally figured out why we're having this discussion in the first place. It was worthwhile. And hopefully we can, yes, I do. And I'm going to definitely enjoy watching the tape. But at this point, we're going to end with this action item unless there are any public comments on this specific item at this point. And then after that, I'm going to ask for public comments on whatever you want to talk about. So anything on item 11, induction of anesthesia versus sedation? No. Okay. Any other public comments at this stage? Then we're going to adjourn this meeting, and by doing it this way, I've ended early, so I continue my record.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that you can get that
That's,
credit,
that's right, get that gold star.
Just as a quick, we need to go back to item 14, future agenda items and next meeting dates. I know, we're in a hurry, but we gotta get there.
We're good.
So the next meeting tentatively is gonna be held in Oakland on April 18th. We have July 25th in Southern California, perhaps. And we know for sure that October 17th, 2017 will be in Fresno. October, yeah. Do you want me to review the MDC assignment priorities? They're in the packet. I think everyone knows what they are today.
I'll be sending out a note to everybody within the next few days.
Okay.
Okay.
And then that's it. Oh, next meeting, there is going to be one more item added to the next meeting agenda, which is the minimum standards for small animal spay and neuter clinics. And then that's an item we didn't get to today. And then we will also have the minimum standards for mobile specialists, if we can fit it in, depending on how full the next meeting agenda is from carryover items.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.